Leave your ego at the door and get ready to be raw. This is Strength to Overcome, where real men find their strength in weakness. All right, guys, welcome back to the Strength to Overcome podcast. I'm Ryan here with my co-host Matt for this is episode 6. Matt, how you doing, brother?
Yeah, good mate. It is episode 6. I know we had to think there for a second, but we're going through them here, which is good. You know, it's funny because I kind of relate my surgery date to how far in we are, but we are a couple of weeks behind. So I'm always a little off on how long the podcast has been going, but yeah, 6, and excited to be here and go through some stuff with you this morning and get it out to the community.
Yeah, man. What's going on in your world right now?
Well, I'm sitting here with, I'm like a cat with toys, my therapeutic type apparatus keeps changing week to week. So now I'm walking around the street holding onto this ball and I'm not in the brace, but I've got one more week before she wants to see me make a full fist. So I'm working real hard, man. Otherwise she's going to pump me full of meds and I don't do that. So we're in a bit of a time crunch now. We could almost do a countdown here.
Yeah, you're getting close to making that full fist, right?
You know, it's funny, as a trainer you'd understand this, but the closer I get to making that full fist and rotating my hand to full supination, and my forearm, around the elbow starting to really scream at me. It's just funny how everything's connected, right? Not just your arm and your wrist and your shoulder, but all these other things. We've talked about how you and I have reconnected lately too. All these things are all connected, and so as one thing starts to work, another thing's, starts screaming at you or changing, right? So a little bit like what we're about to dig in on today.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
What about you, mate? Give me a quick update.
Well, just kind of hanging out here, and today is day one of employees being able to play the TPC Sawgrass Stadium course. I'm actually getting a phone call right now. We should take it.
Yeah, you should definitely jump on that because
TPC call, and let's see what they say.
we're live.
Hello.
Good morning, it's Scott at TPC Sawgrass. How are you?
Hey, good Scott. How you doing?
Doing good. Nothing at all today.
Nothing on the books. I
Nothing available.
Gotcha. I'd seen there was a 1020 open at one point. Did it get snatched up?
No, I'm going to hold on to it. Member, guests, volunteers, so sorry about that.
Oh, okay. So it kind of gets held for somebody else.
It'll get used. Yeah.
Gotcha. What happens later in the afternoon when the tea times die off? There's no room for employees to come out later?
Okay. It's a hard close today for maintenance. After 1 o'clock, the golf course is closed for maintenance.
Gotcha. Okay. Gotcha. All right. Well, I appreciate you calling me back, Scott. Thanks. There you go, folks. So yesterday, the reason this becomes difficult is because it's not only the first time employees can play, but it's also the first time volunteers can play from the Players Championship. So they had what, like 1,500 volunteers that now get their free round of golf starting yesterday. And so the course is packed with all the volunteers from the Players Championship.
So just pause there for a second because, we've got some audience, around the world as we've watched our podcast and YouTube get picked up in Russia and Japan and things like this, and I'm just curious, as the feedback will roll in on this, if people say, what the hell is he talking about? What is TPC? I don't understand. So can you just give the audience an overview on what it is that you're talking about? Because I understand everything you're saying, and a lot of our audience might, but what is TPC and why is it such a big deal?
Yeah, so probably, I don't know if it still is in the top 100 courses in the world. If not, it's just outside. But TPC Sawgrass, it's in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, just outside Jacksonville. It's home of one of the biggest PGA Tour events of each season. They call it the fifth major, but it's the Players Championship. And they've got two courses. So they've got the stadium course, which is the one people know, the iconic 17th green, 17th hole with the island green. They've also got the Valley course, the Dyes Valley course, which is a great course that people can play as well. They have a lot of member play out there. And we as employees get to play it year round, the Valley course, but we're only allowed to play the stadium course during a certain window during the summer months. And so that window happens to be 1 week starting today. And then they close for June 2nd through the 29th, they're closed. And then July and a few weeks into August is our window for employees to play. They've got so many employees at TBC. I think it's like 350 employees. Um, that they have to kind of limit that. They don't like having employees practice out there and clogging up the course for members and guests when they can sell tee time. So you heard I kind of called him out, right? They've got a 10-20 slot open, and he's going to save it for either a member or a guest or a volunteer um, to
And what's
jump into.
the value of that round?
Right now, it's showing online at $550.
Okay, so 550 to play a course that is considered a fifth major. And what sort of purse are we talking about at a major event like this that these guys are competing for? Give us an overview.
I think Rory won I looked it up at the time. It was 4 million. Was it right around 4 million that Rory won for winning the Players this past year? So um, we're talking about a big time. Actually, I think it is the biggest purse on tour right now. Was this past Players Championship. So a lot of money floating around. They hover anywhere from 550. That's kind of a low price to 750, 800 per round, even 900 per round out there on the stadium course. So they're kind of printing money at this point out there. But you got to kind of live hear my disappointment of the day. That was kind of my main game plan for the day was to try to play the stadium course. So doesn't look like it's going to happen. There's no tee time showing open tomorrow either. So I'm probably going to be in the same disappointed boat tomorrow. I don't know. That kind of rubs me a little bit the wrong way that he's saving that tee time, right?
Well, yeah, I know we talked about this just yesterday about the fact that you might be able to get on. I wanted a later shoot time, and I got bumped for the TPC, which I fully expect, and I would do the same. But just to put you on the spot pretty quick here, if I go out and I shoot 150 at this stadium course, how much am I paying per hit? Do you want to throw a number out there for me? Because when I pay $80 for a round of golf on my golf course that I live on, I'm kind of horrified every time I think about what that just cost me. So you $800 round, and I'm blowing it around there, shooting quads on pretty much every hole. That's an expensive, pay per putt or pay per hit round.
Yeah, not to mention you're tipping the caddy probably another $40. You're probably spending money on food. You might buy some things in the pro shop. You're talking about $1,000 day when you go out there, which is pretty wild.
And you get to play it for free if they let you on.
Which it seems like it's not likely to happen at this point.
Well, so we might be just catching the opening moments of your, well, I won't say it, but, a change in your schedule and availability.
Yeah, I mean, it's been tough. Kind of, it's a cool place out there, and it's got the glamour, it's got the star-studded names, but it's also a weird dynamic for golf courses. So my golfers that are listening, it's an odd place. It's fully public, so you can walk on property and start putting if you want. It's not private. It's a full public resort. So they've got some of the public coming out there. They've got resort play that are staying at the Marriott. The hotel owns a lot of the tee times out there. They've got members that pay a very hefty membership fee to be out there. And then they've got the tour professionals that get a free membership out there as well. So it's almost like a three or four-headed monster of an identity for a golf course, which is odd because usually you see, it's either a public course, it's either a private, it's either a resort. So this it struggles with its identity of what it actually is, and it can be hard to build a culture around that and have a team and have employees that are truly bought in because of that. It's definitely a strange thing.
Yeah, and I know you've mentioned in the past you almost feel like you don't have a job because obviously what they pay you is peanuts. And so really the incentive is disappearing slowly if there's really no gain in being able to maybe slip out the back and hit a few balls or even get around during the employee week kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, making minimum wage is one thing if you're able to, go out and practice and play anytime you want. But at TPC, the nature of it is just where you're not really going to get that. They're so busy, they're so crowded, they don't even let you practice um, unless you're going to play. You can warm up before you go play, but you can't really just go out and set up shop and practice because they don't want all their employees to overrun the place, which is understandable.
Yeah, no,
So we'll
absolutely.
see.
a little bit about what we've been working through. I know that, in one of my posts, I put up a picture of my hand in my kid's sand bucket full of ice. And next to that bucket was a book that you and I had spoken of when you came and visited a couple of months back. And then you threw it in the mail for me. And so I opened this box from Amazon, and there's this book in there. And of course, the first take is, I didn't order this, right? Because we all know what we've ordered. And so, when a box comes, we all do this, right? We kind of think, oh, okay, well, the missus must have got it, right? Or one of the kids, if you've got, older kids. And so you open the box and you go, oh, this isn't mine. And you kind of walk around and who ordered this? Is this, And so, of course, Heather says, well, I didn't order it. And so then you start looking a little bit closer. And of course, very quickly I realize, oh, this is from my man. Ryan's, fired it over to me. So I better get in on that and get started. And that's the book that I'm in right now. I've got a couple of other books I'm working through, but that's the relationship book that I'm digging in on. I've got some business books and, time management books, but this is the relationship book that I've been digging in on. And, I got to be honest with you. The other day we had a conversation where you said something that it didn't upset me. It wasn't critical, but it was a moment of, he's right kind of thing. And there was that moment where, I've been married 24 years and across my two marriages, and the statement was, you're the common denominator, and I say it with a laugh because, that's how I'm going to handle that realization of, the things that I'm struggling with and have struggled with for 24 years of marriage, they're mine to own. And, it's always different hearing it from a buddy that's got the best interests at heart versus maybe your spouse. Now, for anyone out there, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's kind of like you probably can't teach Erica how to play golf. It probably, turns into a blow up.
Yeah.
But another pro could step in and, she'd be like, wow, that's amazing. And you'd be standing, on the range next to her going, what the hell? I just told you that yesterday and you threw your club at me kind of thing, right? So I'm going through this book, kind of, it's like an audio book to me. I'm going through it, listening to it like you're reading it, which is funny in a way, but it's also annoying because it's like this bastard's right,
Yeah, so, this book that we're talking about is called Secure Love by Julie Menanno. And it's a book that Erica had actually gotten and read last year, and she was pushing for me to jump into it as well. But it's about, creating a relationship that lasts a lifetime. So like Matt said, it is a relationship book. And Matt had mentioned some things to me, and I thought he might have some interest or get some good nuggets from this book. So I sent it to him, kind of Amazoned it over your way, and you've been digging into it, and I've been digging into it a little bit more. And so that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. Is for those folks out there, the guys that are either in a relationship and are struggling or have struggled in relationships in the past. This book, this Secure Love book, talks about something called attachment theory and different attachment styles. So that's what we're going to kind of dive in on today. And again, we're not diving in as experts by any means. We're diving in as two guys who have read the book or reading the book, and we're sharing kind of our live reactions to it in a way that hopefully some folks can relate to and see some similarities in. So I know you've gotten about halfway through the book, Matt, and they've defined the attachment styles. And what what are some of your realizations just going through the first part of the book so far?
When I read a book, I tend to find myself, and it might be because I've got kids running around, but even before kids, I found myself rereading a page here and there because I really want to grasp the content. And so I know the other day we talked about me, being a handful of chapters in, and you hadn't picked it back up since you were given the book last year or a while ago. And then, half a day later, you text me, you're like, 3/4 of the way through it. And I'm like, what the hell? Like, were you speed reading? Are you somehow got a button there that you're pressing on? It's 2x, 3x, 10x. Like, how are you powering through this? And then, next morning you fire off another text. Yeah, I'm done with the book. And I'm still, muddling my way through these chapters because a lot of it to me is processing, right? I like to really make sure that I understand the book because quite often, unless the book's an unbelievable read, I probably won't pick it up again, but I might spot through it. And so I really want to grasp a lot of this. And so a lot of it's been a real, punch in the face of realizing, how much, not baggage, but how much I'm bringing from my childhood. And I know people roll their eyes, they're like, oh, here he goes, talking about your childhood and this and that, and woe is me, and I had this, and I didn't have that. It's like, no, 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 it's not about that. It's about how you were cared for, or how love was shown to you at that time in your life, which is what develops your ability to handle it later on. And so I've been going through that process, trying to think through my childhood, and a lot of it, honestly, I don't remember. And so I'm reading this book thinking, wow, I fit into this particular category, and I don't remember a lot of the stuff from my childhood. So I'm thinking that there's probably a lot of this attachment style that was developed in me as a kid, which now I've got to process that. I'm not as fast as you maybe reading it, but now I've got to process that, wow, okay, this is what I've been bringing into my marriage, because that's what was, around me. You learn what you live. So that's where I'm at with it. I won't go further in because we've got more to talk about it, but that's been tough for me, for sure.
Yeah, it is kind of a wake-up call. So attachment theory, just reading some notes here, for those that aren't familiar with it, some guys may have heard about it and gotten into it. Others, this might be brand new to you, kind of like it was to Matt, but attachment, it's a psychological framework that explains the importance of early emotional bonds between infants and their caregivers. So for most people, that's, babies and their parents, right? And it basically it says that bonds are crucial for a child's development, well-being, and future relationships. So the way that your parents were with you as a child and how they met or didn't meet your emotional needs form kind of the structure and the framework for all your future relationships, romantic and otherwise, down the path. So I'm a little bit similar to you, Matt, in that I don't have a huge remembrance of my childhood in the sense of like, well, what happened during my childhood, that type of deal. I'm a little, it's a little bit blurry to me too. I've got the normal sense of, oh, it was okay, nothing super traumatic besides, I had the divorce of my parents to deal with, and I know that I kind of minimize it there. That was quite a traumatic experience for me and for most kids in that boat. But in terms of the actual way my parents met my emotional needs, I don't have some idea or thing in my head like, oh, they didn't or they did. I can't really recall. And I think that's probably the case for a lot of folks.
Yeah, no doubt. And I remember the title of the attachment styles kind of catching me early on before I even read them. And the first attachment style, I think, is anxious attachment.
Yeah, the anxious.
Yeah, and I've always considered myself a fairly easygoing character in most areas until I need to be in management, or dealing with a crisis or something that needs immediate attention of that nature. And I wouldn't even say I handle it anxiously either, right? I don't sit around worrying the house is going to burn down, or if I left the iron on, or you know things like that, right? It doesn't really bother me. And so to see that the attachment style that I fell into, as far as how it would describe me, I was a little annoyed. I wish it had been titled something else, because I do fall into that category. And I found that the description of it and the things that I might do as a partner of someone, I fell right into that category pretty quickly. And then, of course, I continued to read and quickly found the Mess's style described fairly accurately in another one. And so, I'm in this position now where I'm making all these realizations, and I'm thinking, well, now what do I do with them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so you've got basically the three, well, there's first there's securely attached. So that's the person who, had their needs met as a child, and that's formed their framework, their bond in their current lives. And so they're a securely attached adult where they're able to act more normally with partners and that sort of thing. And then like Matt said, the three different insecure attachments are anxious, avoidant, and then disorganized, and they kind of evolve on a spectrum. So we can kind of go through and talk about each of those a little bit. We don't need to provide the audience with a full in-depth study, because the easiest thing to do is just to get the book and read the book, or Google what they are. But like Matt was saying, the anxious attachment style, it doesn't mean you're an anxious person, right? It doesn't mean you have an anxious personality, but it's kind of characterized by having a strong desire for intimacy and close relationships, and coupled with a fear of abandonment and rejection. So, often these folks that fall into this category, and I thought it was interesting, the book said that it does skew female. Did you notice that usually the anxious is usually about 75-25 female male, whereas the avoidant is 75-25 male female. But individuals with the style often become overly dependent on their partners, and it can stem from experiences like Matt talked about of inconsistent or unreliable caregiving in childhood. So it doesn't necessarily mean bad, but just inconsistent caregiving by the parent figure in the childhood. Um, and I know, so you said you identify with that a little bit, and I think I originally identified with avoidant, and that's it's also known as dismissive, right? Avoidant dismissive, characterized by discomfort with emotional intimacy, a strong need for independence, and difficulty trusting others. That was the one that kind of first hit me, but this morning as we were getting moving here and preparing for this, I actually took a attachment style quiz, and I came back disorganized. And
I laugh because of what I'll share something in a minute here.
yeah, and so disorganized is a little bit of a mixture of the two, where you've got a little bit of the anxious, you've got a little bit of the avoidant. It's not necessarily a split, but it's just overall inconsistent and unpredictable behaviors in relationships. So you kind of can oscillate between seeking closeness and pushing others away. And again, it's stemming from the inconsistent or traumatic childhood experiences. But that was interesting that I actually, when I quizzed out, I quizzed as disorganized. And so that makes a little bit more sense to me as I'm thinking through it.
Well, that's interesting, and you're going to have to fire off that quiz over to me. I mean, listen, we talked about this for about 60 seconds before we went live here, and I think the audience need to understand that this podcast really is about the journey. We're not going to come on each week and have groundbreaking information for everyone, but it's about the journey, and over the course of, episode upon episode and guest upon guest, we're going to build a platform, the community here, and so I want the audience to understand that we're in the middle of this. We've talked about being down on the canvas and you just got your teeth knocked out. We're going through some really rough times at the moment. So we jump on here and we talk about this stuff. Now, I haven't even done that quiz, but it's funny you'd mention that because the other day you and I talked right after I'd read the first two attachment styles. We're dismissing the secure attachment here for the anxious style and the avoidance style, right? So, in a sense, you've got one partner that wants to, get resolution and get resolution now. And, so an argument blows up and of course you want to finish this through. You want to figure it out. You want to come up with a plan. And the other one says, I'm not ready for that right now and, need some space. And so you end up with these couples, and I've talked to millions of people in my training sessions over, 20-year career there, where you've got this one person in the relationship that wants to deal with it, and the other person wants to almost hide from it. And so, as I'm reading these first few attachment styles, I'm like, all right, I've got the household pegged. I see what I'm doing, I see what my missus is doing, and it wasn't until the next day that I got back around to the book and I read the next attachment style, and it was the disorganized. I'm like, whoa, there's a lot in there that I feel like, man, that kind of captures me. And it was a little bit scary, to be honest with you, because there's a few things in there that now you're on a different, because it's not common, right? It's not a very common attachment style, and I'd have to do the quiz to know the answer to this if I am there. But I did identify very heavily with the description of the anxious style, but when I read that one, that to me gave me a few more nuggets of, wow, I could be falling into that category, just because some of the highs are higher and some of the lows are lower, and I need to do that quiz to find out if I'm in there, because some of the things that, my wife Heather has told me over the years have really pissed me off. And if I was to, honestly read through that description of that style, I might find myself bleeding into that a little bit and giving a little bit of what she said over the years some credibility, which I don't care for, but I've got to work through that now.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's where I identify, and just for folks to kind of give some background on me and kind of just share where we're at is, I've had a long line of failed relationships up to this point, and um, they've all been in a similar manner, really, and that's the tough part. In that each one has kind of gone down a similar path of, starting out well and looking promising, and then fizzling out with a lot of frustration, anger, resentment. And I learned even before I knew about attachment styles, I learned kind of what I told you and about relationships, is that I'm the common denominator. All these failed relationships have gone a certain way, and I'm the one that's been in each of them as that common denominator. And so that's a tough pill to swallow. It also has to do with not only your romantic relationships too, but also your friendships and that sort of thing. And it's for me, it's I don't have a lot of close friendships, and that I think that plays into part of that attachment style too, more that avoidant attachment style. Is maybe I'm fearful of getting hurt or being abandoned, and so I don't pursue or make a lot of close friendships. And it's a little bit frustrating for me and saddening. And but it's also things like this that we're doing and I'm doing with you, I'm grateful for, because it's almost like a small miracle that we've gotten to this point of us being able to come together on a podcast and talk weekly or daily and have that connection. But even with that, I see myself struggling with maintaining that friendship and that closeness. And you've probably even seen it a little bit in some of my texts and interactions. Every once in a while, it's almost like I've got a hand up and I'm kind of stiff arming you away a little bit. And I think that's just all goes back to this attachment style. That's why this book that we've been reading is so interesting. It's I think it's got a lot of roots for us.
Yeah, it's funny you'd say that because I know that because of my injury and not really being able to use my right hand for 8 weeks, I've become a voice texter.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered how people put out these email texts, right? It's like, geez, I don't have time to read that and process like the one thing I'm meant to respond to. I've always been a very short texter. And now I find myself putting these, multiple bubbles together that I know when I send them out just turns people off. But I usually have to preface, hey, I'm voice texting because I can't really text quickly and it's too hard to get the digits doing the thing. And so I found myself like overly texting. And then I've watched your texts, get smaller and smaller. I like put out this email text and I get 2 words back. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
I probably have done that to a lot of people over the years, and it can come across as short or dismissive or rude, but that's how I've been. So I'm kind of in this boat where I'm reading this book thinking, as a friend, I'm probably avoidant because when I get close to people, or if I don't, the further I go down and get to know someone and become friends with them, if I don't like what I see or if I don't find enough commonality in my belief system, I just dismiss people and say, well, you don't believe all the things I believe. I chase a lot of rabbit holes. A lot of people out there know me. I live in the world of, I'll tag it as a conspiracy theorist, but I don't see myself as that because most of the conspiracy theories that I've researched have turned out to be true. So we'll get to that in another episode. But, I live in the world of conspiracies. And a lot of people don't like it because, I can be brash in my belief system because I research the hell out of something and I come to a conclusion, and if you don't like it or you don't want to even listen to it, I'll almost dismiss you and move on to the next person that wants to at least lend an ear. And so I found myself alienating a lot of people over the years, and so in my friendships I've probably been avoidant, and my relationships I've been anxious or disorganized. And so I've got so much work to do, I don't even know how to handle it, because in my relationship side, I think I look to my parents who were married 150 years before they both died, and so I've got this mindset of marriage goes the distance, but I'm also on my second one, and as I've mentioned in a couple of my posts, it's like any day now it could go one way or the other, which is a horrible existence to live in, where you just get to the point where it's like, this is so damn hard. Would it be just better off, ending? And so we're in that state even now where this book creates a little bit of resentment through me because I want someone working as hard as I am on coming up with the answer. And if that person's upbringing or life has led them to a place of dealing with those thoughts a different way, it's so hard for me to think they're trying or they care. And so I just feel more and more alone and lost and lonely. And as you mentioned, I'm not sure how far back in the podcast it is, but you mentioned pretty quickly that the anxious style has a love language or an attachment style of intimacy. And when that's not in a marriage, especially as a male side, testosterone's 20 times that of a woman, right? So when that's missing and, missing for a long period of time, feeling loved, wanted, needed, appreciated just disappears. And so you start acting out in different ways. You act out in anger, you act out in frustration, you act out in addictions, you act out in ways of finding something to numb that missing component. And I've shared in the past that addiction to pornography, for lack of a better phrase. I don't like that word because it doesn't always describe what someone's addiction is, but you find yourself in that, getting that fix, that high. And of course, since the surgery, I opened with that very early episode saying that I felt like a voice said, you've got one more chance. Not because he doesn't give endless chances, but stop playing this game of not dealing with your issues, not facing that you've got an addiction, or not working on who you are, as opposed to always blaming the other person in your marriage or your relationships. And so I'm 8 weeks in, like a drug addict or a alcoholic, where I have to completely turn my back on an addiction that's been there for most of my life, and now I've got absolutely no outlet. I can't exercise, I certainly don't do what I just described, or take care of it, for lack of a better term, and release that tension in me. I'm not out there shopping and getting that high on buying something. Instead we're decimated financially, looking to put a for sale sign in the front yard. Marriage could go either way. Physically, I can't even, do what I want to do, and I don't have any way to release the tension. And so I'm reading this book thinking, wow, I've got so much to work on. But then the brain gets pulled into, well, you've got to go work because you've got no money coming in. You've got to work on your, physical side because you're wasting away. You don't have time to work on your marriage. And so there's these voices inside of your head that just keep telling you how many things you've got to work on. And then when the pressure and the tension builds to the point of, okay, enough, I need a break, I don't have anything to go and do to release that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, it can be tough and kind of overwhelming, right? But the good news is the second half of the book deals a lot with what to do and what the situation is. So it talks about something called the negative cycle that folks get into. It really does a good job of saying, hey, you guys aren't enemies, you and your partner, you and your spouse. It's not you against them. It's you against the cycle, you against the negative cycle that they call it. I've heard other places call it the anxious avoidant trap. So you've got an anxious person, an avoidant person, and that trap is that negative cycle they keep finding themselves in. And describes a lot of fights that you and I can probably relate to, where it's you're fighting about something, but you're not really fighting about the fight, if that makes sense. It's the words you're saying aren't really what you're fighting about. You're really upset that you are feeling not seen or not appreciated or not heard, or you're fearing that they're going to abandon you and things like that. Deep rooted fears that you might have had as a child with your parents, and you're still fighting about that today with your spouse. Is just almost, to me, fascinating, because you might think you're fighting about the keys or the finances or the lawn or whatever it is, but in reality, the under your words are just very raw fear and shame, and a lot of, for me, frustration. It's pretty telling. And so the second half of the book really gets into how do we deal with that? How do we create what she calls like an attachment friendly environment? And that's where it can work out even with one person doing the work and the other not, is one of us can do our best to create what she calls an attachment friendly environment, to where these cycles can be broken, and these traps can be avoided that we go down. One little statement turns into a 3-day fight, and we can kind of break those cycles that keep happening over and over and over again. It's wild.
Yeah, I appreciate the encouragement there, because the second half of the book is going to be something I need to pour into pretty quickly. I feel like there's a real pressure cooker building in my life where, like I mentioned, finances, I need to make big decisions quickly. And as someone that's always been very active, it's like, well, I'll just go and, do X, Y, Z and make money that way just to keep, things moving. And being debilitated like this, it was real hard for me to take that back seat. And as you know, as I walk every morning, you know that, and a long time ago, I can't remember which hurricane it was, but there was this particular tree that I would stop at with the kids, and there's these giant leaves, right, which just fascinates them. And so each time we would go past this on a walk, we would pick up a leaf, and whoever wasn't on the walk, if it was, you know, Heather wasn't on the walk, or one of the kids didn't come that day, we would pick up a leaf for everyone, so that when we got back, they had these leaves, and you know, they're like the size of my face type thing. One hurricane, we went for a walk, and this tree had been absolutely destroyed. It was, you know, there was nothing on it. The kids were, you know, horrified. It was like, what the hell happened to the tree? Is it dead? All the leaves are gone. It was just, you know, wiped out. And I remember wondering if the owners would do something with it. And you know, one day we went back, you know, around this walk, and they had clipped it back, and it was just, now there was this like 10 or 12 foot stump, right? It was almost like, why would they leave it to that point? You know, the branches had been cut back to the trunk. You know, the trunk was still there, but just nothing, right? And I'd seen plenty more trees around the neighborhood. For those that don't know, we live in a hurricane zone, and we get hammered once a year with all these sorts of things. And so I'd seen over the years I'd lived here, people would take trees down for much, much less damage, and they just push them out the ground and get on with it, right? Grass it over. And this particular house, they didn't do that. They cut it back, and then over the course of the last, you know, it must be a couple of hurricanes ago or a couple of years ago, I've watched this tree slowly grow back, and I wasn't even sure it would. I was like, man, this thing might just be one of those, you know, giant tree stump trunk type things that never really grows back, right? And it's slowly but surely grown back, and now it's got all these leaves on it, and it kind of looks like a you know, those flowers that you blow and all the bits go away, right? So there's just this skinny little stump trunk and this bunch of leaves on top, and it's starting to grow, and the leaves are coming back, and soon we'll be able to reach the leaves and pick them for the kids again. And I just this morning was thinking, man, I am that tree where I feel like the Almighty has, you know, cut me back to the point of, you know, I got to rebuild from scratch, and you know, physically I'm crushed, financially crushed. Our relationship is just in a horrible state, and you know, I feel like that tree, but I haven't been completely pulled out of the ground. I've still got hope. And you know, I feel like I've been cut back to this level. You know, a very, you know, religious term is, you know, you want to be bearing fruit in your life, right? You're either growing or dying type thing, and you want to be bearing fruit. And I feel like I've been cut back so tightly, so far back to this trunk, that I feel almost helpless. And I was thinking, like, what you know, what did this tree do to start regenerating? And you know, it had strong roots, which, you know, I've got to really stay strong in my faith. And you know, it got a lot of sunshine, it got a lot of fresh air, it drank a lot of water, right? The basics, as a trainer would say to his client, listen, just get moving, right? Drink lots of water, just, you know, stay strong in the gym, you know, do the basics over and over and over. And that's all this tree's done. It's just done the very basics, and it's held on, and it's grown back, you know. So I feel like there's a purpose for this bicep. I have to thank the Almighty. Every day I walk, I first open with, you know, thank you for tearing my bicep, because I feel like through this process I'm going to become a new man, a new personality that can have a new reality. So that was just something I you know, wanted to share with you and with the audience, that yes, I feel like I've been, you know, decimated, but you know, I also see that there's a reason, a purpose behind it, which you're a part of. So thank you for, you know, being patient with me while I share that.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I know you got a challenge. You're in the middle of a challenge, right? And you know, it's not one of those things where you're standing up on a box preaching about some hard time you went through, because you're going through it right now.
You know, I did have a question for you. You know, you mentioned it and you brushed over it pretty quick. But in your relationships, it seems like you might be a little bit more on the spectrum that the missus is on. And, you know, to share with the audience, of course, you were being vulnerable here. But, you know, back in the beginning, you know, with Heather, and a lot of relationships do this. You know, it's hot, it's heavy, it's emotional, it's, you know, it's, there's a lot of chemistry, there's a lot of physical, you know, sexual connection there. And of course that fades over time, and you know, for some people it doesn't fade significantly, and for some others it just disappears. Did you, or how have you handled that? It seems like you might be a little bit on that side of this spectrum, where that's something that you might have entered into most of your early relationships with, and then it faded.
Yeah, yeah, it's almost like I do everything I can to pull them close and build that early bond and early connection. And then as things get closer and closer and things progress, I slowly put up that wall and put the hand up and, in a sense, pushed them away, metaphorically speaking. And it seems to run its course throughout each relationship. It starts strong, a lot of connection, a lot of closeness, and then the wall starts to go up, and that trap that we talk about, that anxious avoidant trap, tends to pop up and rear its ugly head.
Why have you done that? Or have you been able to identify why you do that?
I mean, probably the best explanation is just that I have such a deep-rooted fear of abandonment that I'm saying I'm so scared of you abandoning me that I'm gonna abandon you first, so I can't be hurt by you abandoning me, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
have you
really
found those
feel that,
relationships?
right? I don't
So,
feel that intrinsically, but that tends to be what makes the most sense to me.
so have you ended most of your relationships?
Most of them, I drive them so far away that they have ended things themselves.
And how have you felt once that's happened? Is there a sense of relief? Has there been a sense of grief? What have you gone through?
In the beginning, in my younger years, there was an intense sense of grief. I would say there's a little bit of both, actually, because I remember specifically feeling a kind of a sense of relief and almost feeling better after the relationship ended, but also being grieving that I'd lost that relationship as well. So it was a little bit of both.
Is there a sense where you were excited to end it, not because there was relief from pain and suffering, but was there a sense of relief because now you get to move on to the next one and get that high again?
A little bit. Yeah, I think a little bit. Try to build that closeness again. Because honestly, your relationship gets so torn down and damaged by these negative cycles. She calls them ruptures in the book. These ruptures, they don't just get healed, right? They keep going and they get deeper and deeper and deeper. And so when you talk about a relationship that's 3, 5, 7 years long, for some folks out there listening, 10, 20, 30 years long, what's the damage that's been done by these negative cycles and the ruptures that have been created by those?
Well, how have you made it through in this situation? I know you shared in one of your previous episodes, spoiler alert if anyone's listening to this one for the first time, but you got pretty close to doing the same thing in your marriage. Because this is your first marriage and you nearly went down the same path.
Yeah, it's almost like I had used alcohol in a way to push her away, right? I was using alcohol because all my attempts of acting out and they call them protests didn't work. She wouldn't budge, and so I even went so far as to use alcohol and my use of it to push her away, and for a minute there it worked, right? But then it's almost like the switch flipped in me and turned back on to where, and this is where I think the disorganized attachment comes in. I like fought for it and wanted that closeness back again, and pulled her back close to me. And then, sure enough, the cycle just repeats itself. The wall starts to go up again after a little bit, and it starts to push farther and farther away. And so that really makes me feel like there's some disorganized attachment behavior going on, at least in my world.
Yeah, so, asking a tough question here, but you guys are obviously expecting here in July. If you guys weren't expecting, where do you think you'd be?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one to kind of hypothesize on. I think probably the expecting the baby coming has brought us closer and kept us closer than it would have otherwise. So I think that's a point that's helped us during this process. But I don't know. That's a tough one.
What's the longest relationship you remember having? An intimate, not obviously with your friends and family there, but what's the longest you've had?
It would be this one. We're coming up on 5 years. We're at like 4.5 years right now, and so that's by far the longest.
What was it before that then?
Before that, it was probably two.
So for a lot of the audience out there that might be, falling into these buckets that we're describing, that might be about the same sort of time span. A lot of marriages make it a couple of years, right? And, you know, do you find that you've probably just fallen into a habit of, not intentionally, but you chew them up, you spit them out type thing? I mean, and somehow you've made it through this one. You've shared that in a previous podcast. So for those that don't know it, go back and listen to that one. But what did you find carried you through this one? Was it her? Was it you? Was it just a divine intervention? What's gotten you to 5 years versus
Yeah, I mean, I got to probably give most of the credit to Erica because she's been the one that's been rock solid in terms of not giving up and giving me chance after chance and seeing me for who I am and that's on her. So testament to her ability to stick with it and deal with her things and deal with my things and really see the bigger picture because when you're in this disorganized or whatever attachment style you're in, it's hard to see that bigger picture and you lose sight of things pretty quickly. And we've talked about, fantasizing about breakups or fantasizing about being alone. And it's special to have someone that can kind of ground you back and be like, hey, and that's a little bit of the secure attachment coming out in her of saying, hey, this isn't us, this isn't who we are, let's get back to what we're made to do and get back on track here because I don't, a lot of times I'm so deep in the weeds, I can't even see that or speak that out into the world.
So for those of us that are listening, and excuse me, I'm talking obviously, but for those of us that are probably more than likely marrying someone that's, the opposite, right? And in this case, I think a lot of people out there are, otherwise it probably didn't get through the dating phase, right? If you're both the same style, it's more than likely never got out of the, that early stages to realize, yeah, I want to marry them. So, for a lot of people out there, you and I seem to have flipped. You mentioned earlier that, I fall into the category where it's, 25% of the guys fall into this category, and most of the time, the female is, in my situation, you seem to be the opposite, right? You
Yeah.
identify with that side, even if, even if your test was disorganized, just to help the audience, see it a little bit more clearly. How do you, when a knockdown drag out blows up, or in Australia we call it a blue, right? If you've had a blue with the missus or the blue with your husband, you've had a blue, right? You've had the blue, and I know that there's one partner generally, and I've read enough of this book to say that one partner's going to remove themselves and doesn't want to deal with it, A, because they don't know how to, or B, because that's how they process it. And then one partner wants to, knock doors down and deal with it right then and there. We're going to sit down and we're going to burn the, midnight oil here to, till we find a resolution. Obviously, you and I are a little bit different, but we're both guys in the story. So it's a little bit, convoluted there. But I'm trying to figure out, for those that are listening, she has been the male in, the book of that attachment style, and I've been the female. So how would I figure out if someone's removing themselves, or how would Erica know, or anyone in the situation that finds themselves with the spouse that kind of removes themselves? Are they removing themselves, or are you removing yourself because you need the space to process it, or are you just hiding? And what's going on the other side? For those that want that resolution, what is it that we could do to give you a safe space so that there can be a place of talking things through and dealing with the conflict versus it just gets swept under the rug?
Yeah, I know I think a lot of that language is buried in the book there about, what you can say to your spouse and what you can put out there to create that attachment friendly environment for both of you. And, saying things like, hey, I see you, or I see you're frustrated, or I know this brings up some negative feelings for you. Can we take a few minutes and talk about it now or later, at a certain designated time? And instead of just being on the offensive and wanting to bash the door down and fix it right then and now, it can be uh, it can be kind of comforting to hear that from the other person, just saying, "Hey, I see you, and I know this is tough, and we're in it together," type of deal, versus you against me, me against you. So
Yeah,
that's
it seems like I got to really dig into the second half of this book, and figure out how to deliver, or request, that space in my marriage where things can be worked through. But it's not so much, even that doesn't sound like I, can go there. It's almost like you've got to create that friendly environment, which which is tough, right? When you're already feeling alone and abandoned, it's tough to stay level-headed. And it's funny because in management, hiring and firing and things like that, I can do it very well, and my skill set shows up incredibly well in those type environments. Attention to detail, dealing with conflict right then and there. In a business, you really don't have time sometimes to let someone storm off or have a week to process it, right? It's like, no, 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 we're dealing with that now. And so in my professional world, I've got to fix things then. If I'm doing carpentry work and something goes wrong, I got to come up with a resolution right there. If I've got to zip to Home Depot or Lowe's and grab the parts I need, it doesn't matter. I've got to fix that issue right there. And so in a world of carpentry, you can't tell the person, hey, listen, I'll be back in a week once I think this through, right? You're on the go. You've got to do it then and there. And even in training, 20 years of training and 40,000 plus sessions, something goes wrong in a workout program, they're hurting or something doesn't feel right or a little tight, you're on the fly. You got to figure it out. You got to make the adjustment. You got to keep them safe. And if you're in management or business ownership, you don't have, sometimes you don't have weeks to process something. You got to do it right then and there. And, some areas you can, delay, but most of the time you got to make decisions pretty quick. And so in all of those spaces, jumping on it and being proactive and getting to the root of the issue and dealing with it, is very good, and it can compensate me very, very well. But in my marriage, it's like the complete opposite. You can't do that, especially because of, her upbringing and her style. That's her story to share. But, she's got her own things that could be worked on, and so I have to come at it in a completely different way. And I think that's where I think sometimes she would say, well, no, 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 Matt's disorganized because when he's working on the house or he's doing a job, he's dialed in, he's focused, he gets the job done. Like, I'll be mowing the lawn till 2 in the morning if I have to, or fixing something, in the middle of the night with a headlamp on, right? It's like, man, how can he get it done? And, that gets praised. But in the relationship side, I seem like I'm getting, lambs to the slaughter. So that's where I think I really wrestle with trying to figure out how do I balance? And it looks like I'm going back and forth and I'm like a seesaw or, I'm flip-flopping, and it's like, no, 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 I'm just really good at it and I want to do it in my marriage, but I'm not being allowed to.
Yeah, and that's probably why I've built myself as an achiever because I can achieve things that don't necessarily require a lot of emotion, and I don't have to be emotionally available to finish a project or start something new or build something from scratch or look at a spreadsheet for that example. But it's my worst nightmare to have to sit down and have a hard conversation with somebody. Managing people was probably my least favorite part of being a entrepreneur. I'd rather like chew my arm off than have to have a hard conversation about poor performance or something that went wrong in the business. And but it was also that was the reason I was able to achieve a lot of things is because I learned at a young age that yeah, I don't have any awareness of my emotions. I don't know what I'm feeling. I don't know any of that. But if I can complete this worksheet in school and get a good grade on it, I'll get praise and I'll feel good about myself.
Yeah, which is why you finished the book in like a day and a half, and I'm over here halfway through the bloody thing.
Right? It was almost like I needed to give myself that pat on the back. And so I'm sitting there at TPC reading this book in the golf cart for the last 2 days. And it was
You
all,
might not have to quit after telling everyone that.
yeah, I know, right? But yeah, that's a good example of just finishing that book was like it was almost like an achievement for me that I needed to do and feel good about. And it's interesting. The whole thing's an interesting topic. So if you guys out there haven't, it's and disclaimer, we're obviously not making any money off of this book, or we're not affiliated with this book in any way. But it's Secure Love by Julie Menanno, and she's a licensed marriage and family therapist. So she actually counsels couples, exclusively couples. She doesn't even work with individuals anymore. Diving into attachment theory, it's pretty interesting stuff. But what else you got? You got anything else on the topic, Matt?
No, mate, I think we can wrap it up there. I only have one more question for you, and then we can, put the credits up. But my final question with the music feeding in right now is, when you finished the book and I told you I was halfway through and wouldn't have it done in time, how did you feel?
Yeah, it definitely struck me as, oh man, he should get on it and do a better job at finishing the book. That was my first reaction. And now in the moment, like when we hopped on today and it was like a book's not done, it's not a big deal, no big deal. Move on. But yeah, it's interesting my reaction to it, right? Or initial reaction to it.
Yeah, and I'm such an achiever that, I told myself I'd be up at 2 in the morning reading it, and like I shared earlier, the emotional toll that, everything that's taken on me, and I, did my best to do it. I feel like I've let you down. I feel like I've let my audience down. I don't feel good about it. So it just feels like another, wow, you suck at that. And I have to give myself a little bit of grace and realize that it's okay. And I've probably been harsh on people over the years as a trainer and as a husband and as a father, where I've probably taken a little bit of that approach that you described and been a little bit rough on people and expected more. And here I am. It's funny how life gives you all these life lessons when you're down, to just say, hey, you know what? I need you to be different. I need you to have some of those sharp edges worn off, and I need you to learn both sides of it. So I appreciate your patience. I know that feeling was there when I said it. I just wanted to catch it on camera, and apologize. But do I really have anything to apologize for? No, but that's my mindset, and I think a lot of people relate to that. So I appreciate your love and compassion, and I'm learning to be a little bit more well-rounded. So hopefully, many podcasts in, I'm a more patient individual, a better husband, better father, and a better friend. I appreciate being on the journey with you, brother. Thank you for all your encouragement behind the scenes, and hopefully things continue to go well on your end.
Yeah, man, we're growing every day. Guys out there, like, subscribe, share this podcast if you can. It's on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcast. Do us a gift. We're not getting paid to do this, so give us the gift of sharing it with someone who you think it might be valuable to, and let's spread this message and spread this community together as we go.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Stay strong. And Ryan and I are working on building a community here in the background. So please help us out by doing what he asked.
All right, guys, we'll catch you next Friday.
Cheers.